I return to this story the way I return to a room where the light is warm and steady and every object has its own sound. I want to add what I was afraid to name back then: the small scenes that build the feeling of a body, and that soft, allowed closeness no one tallies in grades or stairs. I set the details down like tiles on a floor, edge to edge, so you can walk across them barefoot. I remember late autumn in a lecture hall with high windows where light poured from above like warm milk. Dust floated in the glow, and every swipe of chalk left a white trail hanging in the air before it sank. I sat nearer the middle, feeling the firmness of the desk beneath my palms, my shoulders unconsciously stretching toward the quiet height of Cole's posture. Inside me, a metronome began, his steps, his pauses, the cadence of his voice, and I synced my breathing to it as if to a piece of music. In the library, the green lamps made small islands of private warmth. The scarred wooden tables were maps of other people's routes, and I traced their grooves with a fingertip to calm the inner tide. My body beat against me like a bird at glass whenever I sensed him nearby, even if he merely crossed the corridor, his footfall echoing through me like a distant drum. Notes lay at my side, pencils I turned like prayer beads, and I felt I was memorizing not for an exam, but to endure my own skin. Sometimes we met on the narrow stairs between floors. I leaned my back to the cool wall to give way, and a taut, string-thin current ran up my forearm when the sleeve of his coat brushed my wrist. The world would assign it no meaning, but for me, it meant everything. I stepped outside with burning cheeks, loosened my scarf to cool them, and buried my hands in my pockets like a small animal seeing snow for the first time. There were evenings in the dorm when the churn of washing machines matched my heartbeat. I sat on the tile with my spine against the cold wall and cried quietly, without witnesses, so that no one would turn around. Tears slid to my neck. I caught them on a towel like tiny bird tracks. They weren't tears of defeat, they were overflow, too much feeling to fit under one surface. I hugged my knees and pictured a stormy sea. Just survive a few waves and the water will smooth. I didn't dream a movie scene, no kisses under the city lights, no loud declarations. I dreamed of his palm at the nape of my neck, heavy and warm, that reassuring weight that keeps a slender stem from bending in the wind. When winter dissolved the city into cold, I learned to love the long walks between buildings. Snow swallowed sound, each step felt like a short prayer. I carried a thermos of coffee and rationed myself, one hot sip when the air nipped my cheeks, mittens warmed by breath. Sometimes I saw him at a distance, a dark silhouette against the white, and my spine straightened as if a thread ran from his bones to mine. I didn't know what to call the state I was in. Not dependency, not blind obsession. It was a wine-aged clarity that matures in silence. When the course ended and the line between professor and student thinned like March ice, I let myself notice other things. An empty room after a project meeting, our shadows stretched long by warm ceiling lights. His fingers at the edge of a table, quiet like a musical staff. The way he stared at his own notes with the same rigor he turned on ours. Standing near him, I felt my urge to be correct, giving way to an urge to be honest with my body. I caught myself wanting to tilt my head closer than everyday distance allows, not to provoke, but to catch the scent of his sweater. Clean, warm, crisp like new paper. We reviewed my annotations by the window, my shoulder blades taking the temperature of the glass. His hand brushed the corner of the page I held, and a moment later the skin beneath my cuff woke to the rhythm of each breath. I measured my movements like drops from a pipette so nothing would spill, but my body betrayed me, pulse thudding in my fingertips, which I pressed to the wood to ride out the incoming wave. On the day the city turned snow to wet, noisy slush, we stepped out almost together. I felt his warmth behind me, not with my back, with my skin. The air was thick, the streetlights spun faint threads. I walked more slowly than usual, a new page opening in me, not us, but me no longer hiding from myself. A puddle made me pause, I hitched my coat to keep it dry, and in that same second a gentle touch found my elbow, careful, like a question without words. The touch broke over me like a tide. A fine line of goosebumps ran from elbow to shoulder to my neck, tucked itself beneath my hair, and built a nest there. I didn't step away and I didn't lean in. I simply breathed, letting the wave pass through, making it part of my stride. After that, there were many small scenes, the kind a romance is made of when there are more rules and noise than space. Leaving the library, my scarf loved to come undone. I practiced tying a tidy rosette under my chin. Once fingers skimmed the edge of my neck to straighten the wool, and warmth rolled down my spine. It wasn't a possessive gesture. It was care, unhurried and unperformed. I learned to accept this care as I'd learned to accept red pencil in the margin, not arguing, not dramatizing, just letting it in. At the corner cafe, where the barista always drew leaves in the foam, we perched on high stools. Printouts lay between us, and sometimes my fingertips rested on the same paper his hand touched. It was a quiet game of shadows and tactile hints, a shared sheets border, the accidental crossing of brass letter openers while I trimmed a ragged edge. These tiny contacts recalibrated my skin. I learned where I began and where I ended. For the first time, that boundary felt less like a barricade and more like a contour begging for color. One evening, we walked the river path. Water breathed dully beneath the ice. The city tucked its hands into its pockets and looked neater for it. I felt myself grow heavier, not with sadness, with substance. Adult desire in me was no longer a flame that devours oxygen, but a hard seed wanting to sprout. To become a woman, without posters or sudden gestures, meant answering warmth without shame, trusting the body's plain laws. It meant choosing and owning choice, not hiding it inside circumstances. It meant touching at the right time and stepping back at the right time. As our meetings grew more private, I learned a new discipline, the discipline of gentleness. I listened to my skin. In a room with a low lamp and even yellow light, I sat close enough that my knee met his through fabric. It was a touch with no claim, no summons, just the fact of my body beside another, our shared temperature. I noticed how breath evens when I place my hand on the table so our fingers lie near. No one's hand grasped anyone. They simply existed side by side, and it was enough for a quiet joy to curl around the bones. There was an evening when I rested my forehead on his shoulder, not from fatigue, from gratitude. The sweater gave me soap and paper. In my head, the non-stop commentator switched off, leaving room for a simple pulse. I no longer feared my own tenderness. It had once seemed dangerous, like a door that once cracked would let in a gale. Now I knew it could be a blanket that doesn't smother, only lets you lie freely. I learned to read by skin the way fingers read Braille, barely, without forcing. The soft press of shoulder to shoulder in a crowded hallway, the edge of my palm tracing his sleeve as if to memorize the knit, the sense of the day draining from my back if I allowed myself one long, still minute at the window while the city moved beyond the glass. Time tastes different when you stop chasing it. In that slowness, my wanting ceased to be a knife. It became a broad, warm hand over my belly, soothing it. The first time our mouths met, I have to keep it spare, exactly the way I learned to write after those early, strict comments. The room was quiet, the radiator crackled like an old recording. First, I felt breath, a warm tide touching cheek and temple. Then a deliberate nearness, unhurried, as if we checked we were hearing the same music. The kiss was like the first sip of hot tea after a long walk, not scalding, but something that returns your body to you. Nothing extra, no rush. My heart stepped forward and stayed where it was soft, where it was safe. In those days, I stood differently before a mirror. My face no longer hunted for flaws to justify fear. My fingertips grazed my temples, smoothed by tension, and I thought, I am becoming myself not in spite of this, but because of it. My shoulders stopped lifting, just in case of impact. When Cole set his palm, brief, anchoring between them, I didn't brace. I opened, like a night-blooming flower catching a thin ribbon of heat. We made tea in a small kitchen, and I loved those minutes while the water rolled. Steam rose and my hair kept a trace of leaf. I stood close enough to feel the forearm muscles move as he tapped a spoon against the mug. Everything was calm and unforced, without fireworks. In this ordinary nearness, my adult self took root. I knew I could step back at any moment, which made stepping forward feel like choice, not concession. I wasn't proving or rescuing, I was choosing. By spring, air on campus turned glass clear and sunlight pressed closer to the windows. I found a new kind of courage, quiet as a slight lean into the wind so it can't steal your stride. I could stay close and stay whole. I could allow those easy, unguarded touches that turned skin into a map, warmth at the collarbones, wind at the wrists, sun at the knees. Goosebumps no longer signaled alarm. They squeaked like happy wires, the body alive, listening, answering. Once we paused by the old brick wall behind the building, everyone's landmark. Heat from the bricks spread through my back. I closed my eyes and allowed a minute of hush. His hand settled at my waist, higher than chance, lower than insistence. It was a line drawn by care, and exactly on that line my body opened. Blood ran quicker, skin thinned like paper under light, and I felt that same adult desire I had once been shy to name. Not a battering ram of passion, but the need to choose and be chosen, to be seen through, not by eyes, but by a hand that understands. I've wondered why these small scenes weigh more than the cinematic ones. Maybe because they happen inside, not on a stage for others, but across muscles and nerves. I built new rituals. A drop of green herb perfume on my wrist. When our hands drifted close, that note braided with the warmth of his skin. I chose soft wool sweaters not because they were pretty, but because fabric keeps the memory of touch. Each time I pulled one on, my body remembered. Warmth happened here, and it came not from outside but from two meeting gestures. We learned to speak without words. When days ran long and thoughts fell asleep, I set my palm on his chest and matched the rhythm with my own, not to measure, to record the music that remains after doors close. In answer, I felt a small shift, breath or consent to touch, and it was enough. All the world's loud gestures receded. My memory began to store different things. It kept sentences, yes, and arguments skeletons, but also room temperatures, the papery scent of pages, the rough weave of the throw I tucked over my knees when we sat on the floor. The first look that didn't judge, the weight of a hand at my nape, a light kiss that didn't beg a sequel, my even breath afterward. Together they made a quiet shield, not for defense, for peace. I changed in my work. My sentences grew simpler and therefore stronger. I stopped inflating drama on the page. I no longer needed to amplify sounds I had learned to hear. When thoughts wouldn't fit, I didn't punish myself. I rose, poured water, touched the windowsill that kept the daytime warmth, and granted myself a pause as brief as July heat. I knew I would come back and finish, not for a grade, for myself. These little scenes, the closet's faint would smell as careful fingers slid the door, steam briefly veiling my eyes, the soft knot of a scarf under my jaw, a hand at my elbow on slick steps. They made me a woman, not in any sensational sense, but in the real one. I learned to hold my body like an instrument that sounds better for attention than for volume. I learned to accept desire as part of my honesty, not proof of weakness. I learned to touch in ways that leave room to breathe. When I think now of that autumn and winter, I feel a double motion. One moves from depth outward, my adult wanting, calm and warm, a coal burning in the grate. The other moves from outside in, care that brings me home to my body, to my boundaries. I live at that crossing. On my fingertips, goosebumps that don't ask permission. Under my collarbones, a river that has found its bed. In my knees, a tremor that doesn't scare but reminds, I am alive. From a distance, this might look like a story about prohibitions and risk. From the inside, it is a story about permission. I permitted myself to feel. I permitted myself to acknowledge wanting without turning it into a spectacle. I permitted myself to be near and remain myself. I permitted easy, unguarded touches that send tiny lightning across the skin, without shame that they make me heavier in my own eyes. If you ask what it means to become a woman, I recall no dates and no events. I recall kettles boiling, a careful hand at my elbow, the taste of conversation lingering on my lips, and a steady light in my chest. That is my answer.